You want to know something that I've been thinking about recently? Just how many oral storytellers and skillful scribes of previous times learned and labored hand down to us their stories of mysterious or mythical monsters. Years and years of practicing calligraphy, decades and decades of copying and translating over and over again, making do with their scarce supplies of parchment and ink. All of that effort just to give the future an opportunity to continue appreciating those great and terrifying creatures of old. One truly could spend a whole lifetime studying the treasures that they gave us. So yeah, my favorite ones are a painfully inconsequential pack of weird animals which comes from what is basically just a single paragraph and almost entirely irrelevant and probably unreliable story that potentially none of the people who will ever even watch this video will have ever even heard of before. I almost feel a little embarrassed that this, as of right now, is my favorite cryptid story. I mean, it's technically a story about a creature, one that we don't know the exact identity of, which some people have thought to have existed, so it is technically a cryptid, but still, this story is, a story, I guess. Whatever they were, some of them got immediately killed the moment somebody encountered them. So on top of just trying to figure out the identity of some random creature from over 2,000 years ago, I also get to feel like an armchair detective solving a murder case. Well, we know who did it, you'll hear about them in literally like a minute. This has been a really weird video to write if you can't tell. This story just means a lot to me, I guess. I sort of wish it didn't. It might have unironically taken a few months from my life, that's a discussion for later, but in spite of that I still have a sentimental attachment to it. I don't know if all of that would have encouraged you or discouraged you from continuing to watch, but I hope you enjoy the headache that you'll see me go through as I attempt to solve the identity of our dearly departed victimized cryptid. I need not preamble much further. As always, there should be my source document listed in the description along with some occasional citation numbers on screen. I will of course give a blanket encouragement to consider subscribing if you end up enjoying the video, but as a starting point, let's begin by talking about our relevant texts more generally. Our cryptid of interest comes from a piece of literature known as the Periplus of Hanno. It's a rather short text. In most translation, it usually seems to total up to about 3 pages worth of material, which is standardly divided into 18 sections. Like I said, short. At face value, it is one of our few preserved texts that appear to come from the ancient Carthaginian Empire. For that reason, it has actually been a pretty well-studied text, especially during the 20th century. If those assumed origins are true, it would have been originally created in the Punic language, but eventually translated to and preserved in Greek, from which we got the manuscripts that our modern translations are based off of. If the following story truly did happen, as I myself would be willing to believe, then it is usually estimated having occurred towards the end of the 5th century BC, or maybe the beginning of the 6th century BC. Either way, the story that this text, regardless of its reliability or unreliability, communicates is the voyaging of a man named Hanno, who is introduced as a king or some other high-ranking Carthaginian official. It begins with him, along with his probably exaggerated crew and fleet, venturing beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, and sailing down the west coast of Africa. He's described as founding various colonies for his empire, setting up an altar, encountering some of the local geography and wildlife, along with their native peoples. Most notably is a group called the Lixite. He reportedly became friends with them, and because of that, some of them would actually join him and act as translators. That same pattern of them sailing further, encountering the environment, its fauna and people, with perhaps some detours here or there, mostly continues on for a while, although there is definitely a less positive trajectory. Their interactions with the local people become less fruitful, they keep getting scared by stuff. They might have actually seen an erupting volcano, it wasn't great. Finally though, right at the end of their journey, this passage is given to conclude the Periplus of Hanno. Quote, "In the recess of this bay there was an island, like the former one, having a lake, in which there was another island, full of savage men. There were women, too, in even greater number. They had hairy bodies, and the interpreters called them gorillae. When we pursued them, we were unable to take any of the men, for they all escaped, by climbing the steep places and defending themselves with stones, but we took 3 of the women, who bit and scratched their leaders, and would not follow us. So we killed them and flayed them, and brought their skins to Carthage, for we did not voyage further, provisions failing us." End quote. Thus we have our primary intrigue for this video. These so-called gorillae. What exactly were they? Who truly were the victims of this story? Were they, gorillas? They could be, but it'd have to be for different reasons, beyond just the name. The species of ape which we call gorilla is actually named after the creature that got described all the way back here, when they were officially discovered by the West in 1847. I think a comfortable place to begin with would be with a more face value evaluation of this passage. If we assume it to be generally true, what would best fit the profile of our victim? Well, under those parameters, I think there are really only 3 contenders for what these gorillae could have been: a human, a chimpanzee, or the gorillas which would one day bear their name. If this really happened, it really only could have been one of the African apes, all 3 of which, yes, even humans to some extent, probably would have had the capacity to serve as cryptids within Carthaginian culture. Taking a look at the trio that I put forward for contention, which of them is most likely to be our victim? Well, I've thought about it for a little while, perhaps a little bit too long. Too long to the point where I can't fully explain any of my exact justifications for all of my evaluations. I say that because for this specific passage, I've isolated 16 points of contention regarding the identity of Hanno's gorillae. You could collapse or expand my list into more or less categories, but I'm sticking with this structure. I'm using a very basic and perhaps too loose grading system, just based on how much any point of argumentation moves me as an individual, so it's pretty subjective. Most of them have to do with questions regarding the hypothetical location of the incident, the gorillae's description, and the interactions that take place between them and Hanno's crew. I'll try to give a quick rundown and communicate some of the highlights. The first 2 have to do with the location where this supposedly happened, which definitely favors humans, because there is really no consensus on where this hypothetically would have occurred. Any argument instead actually comes down to likelihood. I have to stress just how little agreement there is here. I've seen some people suggest that this event would have occurred in Morocco, and I've seen others say that it would have occurred in the Congo rainforest. Humans inhabit basically that whole continent. Chimpanzees inhabit much, but still less of the possible area. Meanwhile, gorillas are resigned to a considerably smaller range. Thus, there is a descending gradient of likelihood in that order, with gorillas getting the hit pretty hard here in my opinion. The other element has to do with the description of the island itself. Simply the fact that it is an island would itself make humans once again more likely, let alone it being an island within that island. But I think there are enough possible circumstances that could still permit a chimpanzee or gorilla origin. In any case, though, I think the real truth probably comes down to this being one of the more suspect elements of this passage. It is very possible that this geographic oddity is a storytelling feature meant to make the events a bit more exotic. I'm not saying that is the case, I really want to try and take this passage at face value for the moment, but if there is any part of it to be skeptical of, then it would probably be this one. The next set of arguments come down to how the gorillae as a group are described, the makeup of their population, but more importantly, their appearance. A lot of them are minor points which hardly move me, but there is one that has stood out to me more than about anything else on this list, the description of them being hairy. It is so basic that I can't really describe it much further. Gorillas and chimpanzees are considerably hairier than humans, thus it is more likely that Hanno and his crew saw them, spawning this description. On top of that, if these gorillas somehow were humans, then that would mean a Carthaginian person who is of Semitic ancestry, and thus probably quite hairy, called a person that was probably of sub-Saharan African ethnicity hairy, which just seems incredibly unlikely, if not impossible to some degree. I'm kinda committed to the opinion that these are non-human apes, largely because of that. I have another point to bring up here too. This one is more targeted against gorillas, and it comes from the fact that I am uniquely equipped to notice a bit of an argument from silence here as well. I, as a person, due to this behemoth of a video I uploaded a few months ago, should probably have a better grasp on just how exactly someone who has no concept of a gorilla would describe one on their first encounter. And, well, this account just does not read like a gorilla encounter to me. I just encourage you, the viewer, to think about that for a moment. How do you think you would describe a gorilla if you spontaneously met one after having never had any idea of what one was prior to that? The rest come down to an assortment of behavioral decisions made by both the gorilla and their Carthaginian opponents. Most of them are quite uninfluential to me as of this moment. Perhaps if I spoke with some primatologist that was more specialized in the behavior of gorillas and chimpanzees, my needle could be moved a little bit, but I still don't think it would change too much. The only two real highlights here are the fact that the gorilla are described as engaging in ranged combat, which does give an edge to humans, and also the way that the Carthaginians treated their remains, which gives an edge to gorillas and chimps. I don't think for either of those you can get close to formulating a knockout blow, so they have both kind of just cancelled each other out in my mind. I'll cut off my explanation there. I don't think I need to take up any more of your time regarding this aspect of our investigation. I guess you can question me further in the comments if you're curious about anything else. Taking a macro level overview of my chart though, you might have noticed something a little funny, and it's that I don't actually think there are truly any strong arguments in favor of any of our candidates. I do, however, think there are strong arguments against humans and gorillas, and that overall chimpanzees just seem to have the fewest holes in their case. Having said that, what is my official position on what these gorillae were? As of right now, gun to my head, I'd of course have to answer that it was a chimpanzee. Unfortunately, I might die because this story is much more complicated than I presented it to be so far. You've probably noticed that I've kept qualifying my statements with phrases like, if this actually happened, and assuming that this is true. That has been for a good reason, because like nearly any event this far back in history, there is a significant amount of doubt that can be cast onto it. There are two intertwined but distinct threads that I need to deal with: the historicity of Hanno and his voyage, and the reliability of our account of his voyage. This isn't meant to be a voyage on the Periplus of Hanno, just the gorillae which are described within that text, but of course those things are very obviously related. Still, I'll try my best to not unnecessarily widen the scope. This is the hidden layer to my investigation. Did our victim actually exist? Have Hanno and the Carthaginians been falsely accused of the act of killing our beloved gorillae? May they have even perpetrated that lie themselves? Let's talk about it. I'll begin with what we can establish more assuredly than anything, which is a Carthaginian presence in the Atlantic, and more relevantly across segments of Africa's western coast. We have enough support for this going back all the way to the time of the relevant centuries when this would have happened, at least in regards to documentary evidence. I can't really say much for archaeology. I've noticed myself having a consistent blind spot there. Regardless, from everything I've read, a strong Carthaginian and/or Phoenician activity there during and prior to Carthage's golden age seems to be a bit of a consensus from everything I've read. I'm intentionally being brief here because I don't expect anyone to really dispute this. What could be a lot more open to disputation, however, is the notion that there was actually an important Carthaginian man named Hanno who at some point during his life did sail to the relevant parts of Africa. I think the evidence will have a mixed reception. I'll start with the potentially more dissuasive part, which is the time gap. As stated previously, most estimates for Hanno's Periplus range from the late 400s BC to the early 500s BC. We don't have any preserved or explicit attestation to him and his travels until, guess what, the 1st century AD and after that, which is admittedly quite a while. I, however, am not actually that worried about that as much as I think a lot of you may initially be. This is very much a story that Rome inherited from their rival after the fall of Carthage in 146 BC. Given some mentions from Pliny the Elder during the 70s AD and a few other authors in the following centuries, this story so obviously existed during the 1st century BC, potentially within living memory of the fall of Carthage. which is when a story like this would have become available to the Romans. At a certain point, I feel comfortable just assuming that if we know that Carthage had an interest in West Africa, and a not insignificant amount of our sources seem to start saying that there was a guy named Hanno who led that, close to the time when our available sources could have first gained access to that knowledge, then Carthage was intentionally preserving the story. This is why I'm not particularly worried about the historicity of a Carthaginian man named Hanno sailing that long ago. If it happened, I think I would honestly expect the evidence to look sorta like the way it does now. What I am admittedly more worried about is the reliability of the account that we have today, as in the trustworthiness of any individual element of the story. I think there is a better objection to our understanding of whatever Hanno's Periplus was. You see, there appears to have actually been a lot of different versions of it. Sometimes Hanno is referred to as the author, as is the case in our extant version, but in other times, other figures are referred to as the writers, and in further cases it is kind of just implied that there is a plurality of works about him. And most troublingly, the accounts seem to conflict a lot. The most prominent example of this is that a very good case can be made that the original story of Hanno and his Periplus was that he circumnavigated the whole African continent. I just want to stress the point that the text of the Periplus is quite dubious. There are so many questions that can be asked about it. When was it composed? Were some parts of it patched together from other works of literature? How did it originally end? How much did the Carthaginians redact, insert, or mess with the text? Have scribal errors drastically altered things? If there was an original Punic text, how much was lost in translation? Would our version even be the original one? And many, many more questions. As stated earlier, however, this is not a video strictly about the Periplus. It's about the guerrilla described within it. So, how do these criticisms affect that specific story? For this, I'm actually just going to go ahead and try and take the burden off of this text alone, and instead go and appeal to the ancients, since some of them do actually mention this encounter, although, as you'll see, rather differently. We get 3 references to them: Pomponius Mela in the 40s AD, Pliny the Elder in the 70s AD, and the historian Solinus in the 400s AD. The latter 2 explicitly cite other authors for their data, but all of them, at least partially, seem to be drawing from information not found in our modern copy of the Periplus. Isidore of Seville also mentions it, but he's technically medieval and also doesn't help, so I'm going to ignore him. There are a few more ancient figures who have been pointed to as having potentially referenced the incident, but I wouldn't grant any of them, so I'm going to limit my scope to these 3. Mela, to start with the earliest, relates this to us about them. Quote, "A bend of the great sea coast encloses a large island on which they tell that only women live. These women are hairy all over and essentially fertile without having sex with men. They have such a rough and brutish character that chains can barely prevent certain ones from resisting. Hanno reported this information, and because he had brought back leather skins from the one he slaughtered, credibility has been given to it." End quote. As we can see, he appears to have had information that was similar, but noticeably different from what we have in our preserved version of the Periplus. First off, the guerrillae have now seemingly unlocked parthenogenesis, which is an unexpected development at the very least. He seems to both describe them more explicitly as human women, but at the same time they almost come across as even more animalistic than Hanno described them. He also repeats the story of their skins being brought back, referring to it as a mode of credibility. Continuing on to Pliny, still in the 1st century AD, he tells us this, quote, "Over against this promontory lie the islands called Gorgades, where formerly the Gorgoni kept their habitation. 2 days sailing from the continent, Hanno, commander of the Carthaginians, penetrated to them, and reported that the women were all over their bodies hairy, and that the men were so swift of foot that they escaped from him. But he placed the skins of 2 of these Gorgon women in the temple of Juno, for a testimonial and as a wonder, and they were seen there until Carthage was taken." End quote. For those of you who fell asleep during your middle school classical literature classes, a Gorgon is what Medusa was. Pliny, in my opinion, is not intending to call Hanno's creature that, but it is very easy to read that as the implication. Other than that, what he communicates feels much more familiar. He also further backs up the element of Hanno bringing the skins back. The quantity is different, but crucially, I think he supports what I considered the very obvious adoption point of the Hanno narrative into the body of Western literature, even the gorilla part, that event of course being the fall of Carthage. Silenus largely repeats Pliny, although there are some mix-ups. I need not read out all of his text, I just appreciate the extra attestation. He also might have actually thought that these were Gorgons. Still not totally sure about that, but it might actually be the case. What can we learn from this? First, I have been persuaded that this gorilla segment of the Periplus is likely just as much a part of the Hanno narrative as much as any other part may be. Basically, if there was a Hanno who really did take this voyage so long ago, I think he met something that would inspire the stories preserved in our extant section of the Periplus, as well as an alternative text that would become the source material for people like Pliny, Silenus, and probably Mela as well. I've wrestled back and forth so much, written and rewritten various parts of my script again and again, but I really do think that our gorillae were something. I've thought about it, and I don't see a reason for them to have edited or invented this part about the gorilla. Compared to more important or intimidating things, they're pretty mundane for the most part. Weird, but not necessarily frightening. Not the kind of thing you would use to dissuade people from going to your prized training grounds. If you wanted a trophy collecting story, which seems to be the real intent of its inclusion, then I think you'd invent something a little cooler than this, right? No shade to my gorillae, I love them, but they're kinda just like hairy, and that's all. Compared to the other things that their contemporary sailors would have been worried about, this is literally nothing. Thus, what is the identity of our dearly departed cryptid? I still think they were chimpanzees, although I will grant that I don't think it was impossible for them to have been gorillas. I'm very confident though, near assured that it wasn't a human. The extra material from our trio hasn't really changed much for me on that front. Assuming I'm right, I've found it interesting how these apes, which on their own would have essentially already been cryptids to any Mediterranean person from this time, in a strange way kind of morphed into even more cryptids. During the Roman Empire, it seems like they kinda sorta filled a role of an almost proto-Bigfoot, if I had to call it that. I mean, the gorillae were basically just described as hairy, wild, animalistic humanoids. That's basically just Bigfoot. During the Renaissance, the link between them and Gorgons seemed to have been kinda flattened, so they technically also became Gorgons, which would have resigned them more to a more mythological realm, but still, that's kinda cool. Isidore of Seville also gave them wings, which is something, I guess. I just want you to remember the gorillae. I think they were real, I think they were chimpanzees, maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm right about any of that, then it was by their death that we got to hear about them. So, rest in peace to my ape bros from so long ago. You know what? I will give them a moment of silence. And it is from that absence of words that I will conclude this video. I hope that you subscribe if you enjoyed it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts or questions in the comments. Maybe like the video, whatever else. But most importantly, I want to thank you for your time and attention. I hope that I was able to make it worth it. God bless, and goodbye. Alright, video over. I have some stuff I sorta want to say at the end here, but it's 4:30 in the morning, so I kinda don't want to. I guess I'll just say this video, I hope it didn't come off that way in the recording, but this was really a slog to get through. The writing, it was rewriting and writing and writing so many parts over and over and over again. I hope I didn't cut too much. I feel like the information and the research for this video was pretty good, but I really don't feel like that came through that well in the script. I don't know, I guess I'll see how the response is if anyone watches this. I still really love the topic, I really enjoyed this video, but man, I had some serious like writer's blocks at some point, so yeah, a bit of a slog to get through, but pushed through, and now I'm recording, and now I have to edit it. So hopefully I can do that before the week is up. Anything else? I guess, as always, I should say, I am grateful. Thank you for watching this video. That's a very kind gesture, especially if you watched any length, really at all. Not even any significant length. I just appreciate you taking the chance on it. So, thanks be to God that I had the opportunity to do this. I hope I can keep doing that. I really do. I don't want to get disillusioned or get writer's block or not take the chance I have to do this seriously. So, yeah, I'm grateful for it. Thanks be to God for that. And thanks be to you for choosing to watch this, I guess. Okay, I'll cut off my ramblings there. Okay, God bless, and goodbye.